All right, welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. Sometimes we cover stories that, well, they just seem like they're over and done with.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You think you've seen the last of something, right?
Yeah, and then bam, they come roaring back.
Yeah.
It can be pretty fascinating to see how that plays out. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. The return of Shein to the Indian market.
A comeback story for sure.
For sure. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a fast fashion giant that was, let's face it, completely kicked out of India 5 years ago. And now they're back. We've got this really interesting article from rbc.ru. It's from March 11th, 2025, that really digs into how this all happened.
I'm curious to unpack this one.
Me too, because there's a lot to unpack. But I think for our listeners, the big goal today is, to understand this whole journey. Like, why was Shein so incredibly popular in India in the first place?
Right, because they really took off, didn't they?
Huge. Then, of course, what exactly led to that ban? And I think most importantly, what are the conditions of this comeback? Because it's not a simple "we're back" situation.
Definitely not business as usual.
Not at all. So let's try to paint a clear picture of all of this.
Yeah.
So rewind back to around 2017. Shein enters the Indian market, and I mean, they were everywhere.
They really were. It was like they appeared out of nowhere and suddenly everyone was talking about them.
It was remarkable. And the article highlights this massive initial investment, right? Something like 2.5 billion rupees. It's about $35 million just pumped into marketing.
It was a huge splash. They were all over social media. Influencers were showcasing their Shein hauls. It was definitely a very strategic and well-funded entry.
And they were laser focused, at least initially, on women's clothing. And, it was super affordable.
Yeah, I mean, that was a huge part of their appeal, wasn't it? The prices were incredibly low, especially compared to what many Indian consumers were used to.
Exactly. But they didn't just stick with that one niche. They quickly started expanding, didn't they?
Yeah, they broadened their offerings pretty rapidly. I mean, they added men's and children's wear, accessories, the whole works. And I think one thing that's really interesting here is that they seem to recognize early on the potential beyond the major cities.
Oh, yeah. They went beyond just targeting, like, Mumbai or Delhi, right?
Yeah, they tapped into those smaller towns and cities, which, that showed a really keen understanding of the vastness of the Indian consumer market.
And they weren't just, like, importing everything directly from China and hoping it would stick, right?
Yeah.
They were actually quite clever in how they localized their approach.
Absolutely. I mean, collaborating with local designers to create those fusion and Indo-Western styles was a smart move. It really helped them connect with local tastes and preferences right from the start.
And those early numbers, I mean, they're pretty amazing. Think about this. 1 million active users placing 10,000 orders every single day.
Wow, that is a serious volume.
Massive.
Yeah.
And the average order value was somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 rupees. That's like $15 to $22 back in 2018.
All right.
So people weren't just buying one cheap top. They were filling their carts.
They're definitely going on shopping sprees. It really captures that fast fashion mentality, doesn't it? Buy a lot, wear it for a bit, and then move on to the next trend.
And they even staged a fashion show in Mumbai back in July 2018. They were making a serious statement. It was like they were here to stay, and they were going to be a major force.
It seemed like nothing could stop them, but
But then things started to get, well, a little complicated. The article points to these customs issues in Mumbai in 2019 as maybe the first sign that things weren't all rosy.
yeah, that was a bit of a turning point. I mean, getting 500 parcels seized by customs, those belonging to their Indian entity, Sino-India E-Tail, that's a pretty big deal. And then you add the accusations of underreporting import costs.
Right, like they were trying to dodge taxes or something, right?
Yeah, essentially. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, it suggests there were some potential, let's say, discrepancies between their operational practices and Indian regulatory requirements.
Right, they were maybe pushing the boundaries a bit too far, and of course that kind of incident puts you under a much brighter spotlight.
Exactly.
And then comes the big one, the 2020 ban. Shein gets swept up in this huge wave of bans on Chinese apps, 58 in total, including some really big names like TikTok and WeChat.
A massive crackdown. I mean, the official justification was national security concerns, which is, that's as serious as it gets.
Yeah, you don't mess around with that. And the article specifically mentions the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, citing concerns about the violation of user data privacy.
Right, and those allegations of illegal information collection, it was all tied into this growing distrust of how these Chinese companies were handling user data.
And let's not forget the context here. This was happening against the backdrop of that military conflict with China in eastern Ladakh in May 2020.
Yeah, geopolitics were definitely at play. Tensions were high, and there was this increased scrutiny of Chinese companies operating in India.
And when you consider the sheer scale of Shein's presence, at that point, something like 50 million app installs in just 3 years, I mean, that's a huge amount of user data.
A goldmine of information, potentially very sensitive information, at least from the perspective of the Indian government.
So at that point, it seemed like Shein was gone from India for good. I mean, a ban like that, it's not easy to come back from.
No, it's not. But then, fast forward to early February 2025, they pull off this pretty remarkable comeback. And they don't just sneak back in. They partner with one of the biggest players in India, Reliance Industries.
Talk about a power move. I mean, Mukesh Ambani, the owner of Reliance, his name is synonymous with business success in India.
It's a really strategic partnership, I think. Reliance has this incredibly diverse portfolio: retail, energy, telecommunications, finance, you name it.
They're like a giant octopus with tentacles everywhere.
That's a pretty good analogy, actually. And partnering with them immediately gives Shein this level of credibility and deep local market knowledge that they didn't have before.
It addresses a lot of those concerns about, foreign influence and data security that probably led to the ban in the first place. And there's another interesting detail here. The article mentions that Shein itself shifted its headquarters to Singapore.
Oh, that's an important point. Moving to a more neutral regulatory environment could be really advantageous for their global operations, and maybe even pave the way for a future IPO.
So they got this new base, this powerful partner, and they're back in the Indian market. But they haven't exactly been shouting it from the rooftops, have they? It's been a much more subdued relaunch.
Yeah, it's been pretty quiet, at least compared to that initial blitz back in 2017. Their app is back online. Their website, sheinindia.in, is live. But there hasn't been this huge marketing push. It's all being managed by Next Gen Fast Fashion, which is a subsidiary of Reliance Retail Ventures.
So Reliance is really hands-on in this whole operation. And you know what's interesting? The article mentions that Shein products were actually available through Reliance's online retailer, Agio, for a few months before this official relaunch.
Oh, really? It's almost like they were doing a trial run, testing the waters and seeing how consumers would react.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
And the early signs look pretty good, actually. The app has already racked up over 10,000 downloads on Google Play, and it's cracked the top 10 rankings in the App Store for similar apps.
Not bad for a company that was essentially exiled for 5 years.
And they're playing on that nostalgia too, aren't they? The app has this banner that says, "The OG is back."
Oh, I saw that. They're definitely trying to tap into that brand recognition they built before the ban. But they're not going full throttle just yet. Their service area is still pretty limited. Mumbai, Navi Mumbai, Thane, Bangalore, and New Delhi.
Right, so it's like a phased re-entry. Maybe they want to make sure they can handle everything smoothly before they expand to the entire country. Logistically, that makes sense?
Yeah, and I'm sure they want to demonstrate that they're strictly adhering to all the new regulations before they go nationwide.
And the article mentions that the initial agreement with Reliance was signed back in May 2023. So it took almost 2 years for them to actually relaunch. That tells you something about how complex this whole process was.
Yeah, navigating the regulatory landscape, meeting all those requirements, it's not a quick and easy thing, especially when you're dealing with a market as big and complex as India.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, all this is happening while Shein is reportedly under scrutiny for its tax practices in the U.S. and considering a potential IPO in London. So they've got a lot going on.
A lot of balls in the air.
But the Indian market is clearly a huge prize for them. I mean, projections are saying it'll be worth over $42 billion this year. So, yeah, they really want to be a part of that growth.
Makes sense. And I think it's interesting how Reliance is playing this. On the one hand, they're partnering with Shein for this mass market push, but they're also working with some pretty high-end international luxury brands.
Yeah, like they want a piece of every segment of the market. And they've already got this massive network of like 13,000 value-focused clothing stores across India.
So they're really well positioned to kind of leverage this Shein partnership and really cement their dominance in the fast fashion space.
And there's another point that I thought was really important. The article mentions that the Indian Minister of Commerce and Industry made a statement back in December 2024 saying that the sale of Shein products was never actually banned. It was the service itself.
Oh, yeah, that's a really key distinction. So the actual clothes, the merchandise, so that was never the issue. It was all about the app, the data management, the way they were operating.
Right. That's where the concerns lie.
Which brings us to what's arguably the most interesting part of this whole story: the strict conditions of Shein's return.
Yeah, this is the big one.
Yeah.
And The article lays out some pretty major requirements, the biggest of all being local production. Every single Shein product intended for the Indian market has to be made in India.
Wow, so no more importing everything from China. That's a pretty fundamental shift.
It's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And that's where this partnership with Reliance really comes into play. This isn't just a simple distribution deal. It's a long-term licensing agreement. So Reliance is essentially acting as the buyer. They're going to be sourcing all these goods from Indian manufacturers, and then they're basically renting the Shein brand.
Oh, so Shein doesn't actually own any part of the Indian business operation.
Exactly. They get a licensing fee, but that's it. And this structure likely addresses a lot of those concerns India had about foreign control.
Yeah, it definitely gives them a lot more oversight.
And the data regulations are even more strict. All customer data generated within India has to stay in India.
So Shein has zero access to it. They've had to give up a lot of control.
And not only that, the platform's servers have to be physically located within India. And they're subject to these regular mandatory security audits that comply with Indian standards. It's very clear that the government was really focused on those data privacy issues.
Yeah, they're not taking any chances this time around. It really highlights the importance of data sovereignty in India, the idea that they have the right to control the data generated within their own borders.
It's a big deal. And this whole mandate for local production, it has these really interesting implications for India's manufacturing sector.
Yeah, this could be a big boost for Indian textile manufacturers, potentially even create new jobs and stimulate economic growth. It's not just about fashion, it's about industrial policy.
And to that point, the article mentions that Shein has pledged to support those local suppliers. They're planning these training programs for over 25,000 small Indian manufacturers.
That's a pretty significant commitment.
And it's not just about producing goods for the Indian market either. Reliance Retail has this vision of turning India into a global manufacturing hub for Shein.
Oh, so they're looking beyond India's borders. Interesting.
Yeah. The idea is that Shein can leverage its global network, help train Indian manufacturers, and then potentially start exporting those goods to other markets. It could be a win-win.
It could be a big deal for India's textile industry if they can pull it off, make them a major player on the global stage.
Now let's shift gears a bit and think about the competitive landscape. Shein's return is going to shake things up. The article suggests that this partnership with Reliance is going to give them a real edge against some of the existing players, like Trent, that's the fast fashion arm of the Tata Group, and Flipkart India, which owns Myntra.
Yeah, those are some big names in Indian retail. It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out.
And it's worth noting that Trent has apparently been doing really well. They were actually leading the MTY 50 index in 2024. On the other hand, Reliance Retail has been facing some weaker demand.
So this could be a way for Reliance to really strengthen their position in the fast fashion market. They're bringing in a big gun with Shein.
Exactly. And that analyst quoted in the article makes a good point. This partnership is definitely going to bolster Reliance's overall consumer offering.
It's a smart move. And with that Indian fast fashion market projected to be worth over $50 billion by 2031, I mean, it's a huge opportunity. Everyone's trying to grab a piece of that pie.
So to kind of bring it all together for our listeners, Shein's journey in India, it's a really fascinating case study. We've seen this meteoric rise, a dramatic fall from grace due to those national security and data privacy concerns. And now this calculated comeback under some pretty strict conditions. And it's all orchestrated through this strategic alliance with Reliance.
It's a really compelling story, and it goes way beyond just selling clothes. It touches on politics, technology, economics, you name it.
Yeah, it's got it all. And it raises some really interesting questions about how global companies operate in an increasingly interconnected, yet also increasingly nationalistic world.
Absolutely. The rules are changing, and companies have to adapt if they want to succeed.
And that leads to a final thought for our listeners to ponder. Think about the implications of this model. International brands entering a market not through direct ownership, but through these licensing agreements and mandates for local production.
It's a very different approach, and you wonder if it's a sign of things to come.
Wow, could this become the new norm in a world where data privacy and national interests are paramount? Is this the future of global retail? Something to think about. All right, that's it for our deep dive today. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure.